In China, a long time ago, I hear my mother say, there was a rich farmer named Zhang, such a lucky man. Fish jumped in his river, pigs grazed his land, and ducks flew around his yard as thick as clouds. And that was because he was blessed with a hard-working wife named Guo. She caught his fish and herded his pigs. She fattened his ducks and doubled all of his riches year after year. Zhang had everything he could ask for, from the water, the earth, and the heavens above. But Zhang was not satisfied. He wanted to play with pretty, carefree woman named Lady Li. One day he brought this pretty woman home to his house, made his good wife cook for her. When Lady Li later chased his wife out of the house, Zhang did not run out and call to her, "Come back, my good wife, come back." Now he had Lady Li. They were free to swim in each other's arms. They threw money away like dirty water. They slaughtered ducks just to eat a plate of their tongues. And in 2 years' time, all of Zhang's land was empty. And so was his heart. His money was gone. And so was pretty Lady Li, run off with another man. Zhang became a beggar. So poor, he wore more patches than whole cloth on his pants. He crawled from the gate of one household to another, crying, "Give me your moldy grain." One day he fell over and faced the sky, ready to die. He fainted, dreaming of eating the winter clouds blowing above him. When he opened his eyes again, he found the clouds had turned to smoke. At first, he was afraid he had fallen down into a place far below the earth. But when he sat up, he saw he was in a kitchen, near a warm fireplace. The girl tending the fire explained that the lady of the house had taken pity on him. She always did this with all kinds of people, poor, old, sick, or in trouble. "What a good lady," cried Zhang. "Where is she, so I can thank her?" The girl pointed to the window, and the man saw a woman walking up the path. "Ayah!" That lady was none other than his good wife, Guo. Zhang began leaping about the kitchen, looking for some place to hide, then jumped into the kitchen fireplace just as his wife walked into the room. Good wife Guo poured out many tears to try to put out the fire. No use. Zhang was burning with shame and, of course, because of the hot, roaring fire below. She watched her husband's ashes fly up to heaven in 3 puffs of smoke. Wah! In heaven, the Jade Emperor heard the whole story from his arrival. "For having the courage to admit you were wrong," the Emperor declared, "I make you the kitchen god, watching over everyone's behavior. Every year, you let me know who deserves good luck and who deserves bad." From then on, people in China knew the kitchen god was watching them. From his corner in every house and in every shop, he saw all kinds of good and bad nature and the complaining one. He saw greediness, generosity, harmonious. And once a year, 7 days before the new year, the kitchen god flew back up the fireplace to report whose fate deserved to be changed, better for worse, or worse for better. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. I am going to talk about the book that got me started in my love of Asian authors, particularly female Asian authors. I don't know about y'all, but in grade school, I was required to read The Kitchen God's Wife by the greatest of all time, Amy Tan. So, a little bit of history in my life. I've told y'all I grew up going to private school. When I was a kid, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade were considered junior high. I was introduced to this book in junior high. But I was a rather young junior higher. I was 10 when I started sixth grade, or 9. December baby, they used to let you put your kids in school at 3. That's not the case anymore. But I was introduced to this book rather young, and I ended up reading it over the years. I've probably read it 20 times. Easily. Now, I know for a lot of people, the most well-known Amy Tan work is probably The Joy Luck Club, and I've read it several times as well and seen the movie. Love them both. But this was the book that got me. When I tell you this book got me, and if you've never read it, I'm not going to completely spoil it today because I do want you to read it, and we can talk about it down in the comments. But it is a beautiful story. What I love about these women's stories, especially when they are coming out of cultures that are different than mine or extreme hardship, is realizing that across culture, we all have very much in common. We want the same things. We want safety, a happy life, to provide for our families, to eat every day, to have shelter over our heads. We're not all that different. What's different are the norms established by cultures as to how you get there. And when you're reading historical fiction, you've really got to understand the culture that the book is set in so that you don't put your notions of your own culture on another one. It's not a judgment call when you're reading these books. It's understanding. It's sitting back and going, wow. And this is one of those books because it's another story of a mother telling her life story, which has been shrouded in secrecy for years, to her daughter, to her family, letting them know where she really came from, the things that actually happened in her life, that there are some things they think are fact about her that are in fact made up because that's where she came from and she had to. You don't know what a person's been through. That's why it's always safe to lead with kindness and grace. Unless you've truly lived another person's life, which none of us can, never assume. There are horrors in people's past that would make a lot of us lose our dinner if we heard about them. But before we dive into the book, let's talk a little bit about China during this time. World War II. So the reason it's called World War II, for those of you who might be in a school that's not talking about it, it was a war where a good portion of the world was involved. There's, the Allied powers and the Axis powers, and we're not even going to call them good and evil because at the end of the day, the people who start wars and the people who fight the wars are very different. Sending young men to die for a powerful man's ideas is a tale as old as humanity. So this is not a dispute over who's right and wrong in war. Not going there. What I will say, though, is when people live a good portion of their life in and around active war, it has an effect on us and on our societies that unless you've lived through it, it's very hard to understand without really digging in and doing the work. Already before World War II, China's one of the oldest known countries as a country on earth. There are the African nations that are very old, and the Asian nations are very old. These are the cradles of humanity. Even today, 1 in 4 people on the planet is Chinese. Not Asian, Chinese. Okay? They've always had an abundance of population and been a power in the world. But with all of those people, it's also been very steeped in culture. You'll find the African continent to be much the same. Something like 1 in 4 people on the planet is of African descent or African. These are huge numbers of people, and these are massive influences of culture. So let's understand a bit of Chinese culture at this time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, 1910, 20, 30, 40. So except for technology, the structure of the family at this point in time really hasn't changed. Dad's the head, there's a mom, other wives are optional, as many kids as you can make. The richer you are, the more wives and concubines you can have. That's pretty standard. Foot binding's not nearly as popular as it used to be. There are still women walking around who came from the generations of bound feet and kind of want to do it to their daughters. And then there's modern women, as they call them, who are educated and do not want to do the things that their mothers and grandmothers did. They have gone to college. They've learned about the arts, philosophy, all of those things, and they are more set on doing something positive with their lives. But even with those ideas, unless they're in a family that's encouraging them to be more progressive with their life, to do things other than just, be one of five wives and pop out babies, even with all the education and all the talents, that's going to be their fate, because it's not a society of choice. And even for the men, though they have more freedom, they still have family obligation. It's their job to provide for everyone. The first son has to carry on the family legacy. If you're from a good, upstanding family, you gotta do what the family expects you to do. Marry who they picked out for you. It's not a choice. So it's a different world than most of us in the Western part of the world are used to. I grew up American, a modern American on top of that. So there are things I've never experienced and would never have to experience. So just to level set before we really dig in. Now, again, I'm not going to super spoil it, but what I am going to do is give you a little bit of a trigger warning. There are some things that go on. I may or may not talk about them, but you're going to get to some chapters in this book and some words in this book that are going to give you feelings. And yeah, that's the best I can prepare you for them. Because Amy Tan goes all the way in. And I cannot believe they let me read this in sixth grade, honestly. But it's one of those that I feel should always be required reading, because it's about human experience and not prejudging your aunts and uncles, your parents, your grandparents, and not expecting even people that come after you to understand what happened in your life. Every generation has hardships they have to go through. They may be different hardships, but every generation has them. And we have to learn across generations to have open minds, open hearts, open ears, to listen, to take in, to understand, to want to know. So let's talk about the main character, Winnie. Winnie has a daughter, as customary in an Amy Tan book. Her name is Pearl. Great name. Pearl is, at odds with her mom. She's a grown woman. She's married, but she doesn't quite understand her mother. She's going through her own things, and isn't understanding why her mother has certain viewpoints and opinions. But they've been like this for years. They've been like oil and water. They don't mix. And a lot of that is because Winnie comes from old culture, and she has brought her daughter, and is living in America, in California, where a lot of Chinese immigrants ended up, and refugees following World War II and beyond, living in the Chinatown area with what family and friends were able to make it out as well. So think about that for immigrants. If you were raised in a certain type of culture with certain mores and norms, and now you're in this Western culture, you kind of want your kid to still have your values, but you still want them to have the freedom of what a Western culture offers. Freedom to choose who you want to marry, choose your career, choose if you want to have children. These are choices, not obligations in American culture. And not having experienced China firsthand, her daughter doesn't really get that. Well, along with Winnie is Auntie Helen, and they're not really blood related, but learn about that in the book. It's a whole story. But Auntie Helen one day tells Winnie that she no longer has to hide her past, because her demon husband from back in China has finally died. So if she doesn't tell her daughter Pearl about their past, Auntie Helen will do it for Winnie. So she kind of backs Winnie into a corner, is like, now is the time to tell your daughter everything, which terrifies Winnie, because she got secrets and she got stories. But it's time. Literally, her past has died, and she's come to a place where she can tell Pearl the truth about who she really is, what happened in her past, how she ended up in America, and why she raised her daughter the way that she did. So Winnie had the misfortune of being the daughter of a double second wife while in China. So we're going back now. What is a double second wife, you add? It's an unlucky position in the culture of polygamy and concubines. And remember, there's a difference between a wife and a concubine. Wives have status and power. Concubines are just there for fun. The only power they have or can exert are based on the favor the husband shows them. The first wife, whether the husband likes or not, still controls the other women and the servants in the household. But concubines, they just exist. They can be made wives, but it's not guaranteed. They're flowers to be plucked, sniffed, and then they're cast away. But the problem with that is, especially for the woman, is if you're picked to be a concubine and then you lose favor, what do you do with your life? In that society, women are supposed to be pure and perfect. That's a whole other discussion. I'm like, anyway, don't go there. But with that being said, there is a rich man who has 5 wives. Very common in this culture. Again, not a judgment call. We have to understand the culture that we're talking about. And one of his wives, the second wife, to be correct, takes herself out. Is that the way I can say that on YouTube and not get banned? Yeah, takes herself out. And Winnie's mother, before Winnie is born, obviously, is taken into that family to be the replacement for that second wife. So she's a second wife replacing a second wife. She's a double second. And if you know anything about some of the superstitions and whatnot in a lot of Asian culture, the number 4 is very unlucky. When you say 4 in most Asian tongues, it sounds like the word death. Like in Japanese, ichi ni san shi, and the word for death in Japanese is shi. They sound real close. So like in American culture, 13 is the unlucky number. So most buildings, check it out now. Go to New York, those buildings that are over 13 floors, there won't be a 13th floor. That button's not there. There physically is, but it's not called that. In a lot of Asian buildings, 4 is avoided. In good feng shui, there ain't no 4s because 4 represents death. So her being a double twice, that's 4. She is a bad omen into the family, and no one has an obligation to treat her right. And they don't. The other wives treat her terribly. Anything she says, does, tries to be, no one cares. 0 people care. She is the unluckiest member of the family. And then when she finally has a child, it's a whole daughter. So even worse, not only are you a double second, but you have the nerve to pop out a girl. Useless branch. We talked about that in another book. That's not my opinion. That's just phrasing. It's just terrible. And as Winnie is growing up, she experiences 2 different versions of her mother. Her mother, who wants so badly to tell her daughter everything that's going on, to protect her daughter from what she knows is going to come for her in the future, but also the family itself is sickeningly sweet to Winnie. Because sometimes, in some cultures, adults battle by using their children. That's the best way I can say it. Oh, your child sang a solo in the recital. My child put on their own concert. Stuff like that. Oh, I see your child was number 1 in the physical tryouts for export. Well, my child is number 1 academically in the entire region. Yeah, that's the kind of world they're in. And then also using the children to criticize one another. Rather than telling a woman or a man they're unattractive, they'll look at a child and say something like, "Oh, I see where your upturned nose comes from. How did your eyes become so close together?" I mean, it's just real shady. It's a little sickening when you read it. Winnie, as a child, doesn't realize that they're messing with her, because they'll give her gifts and stuff like that. But they're really building her up for what's coming next, because this is going to be, as far as they're concerned, the best part of her life. We'll give her a little bit of happiness because we know what's going to happen to her later. And nobody likes Winnie's mother. And in fact, Winnie's mother disappears at one point, and Winnie doesn't know what happened to her. More than likely, look at my eyes. But now she is the orphaned daughter of a double second, because dad don't care. She's a daughter. Sends her off to live with relatives. And she has an okay life with the relatives. The relatives accept her because she comes from a wealthy family. And if they dig in and take care of her, there could be reward later on. Don't think of it as altruism and they're like, "Oh, yes, we'll take care of the orphan child." No, that wasn't it. They know they're going to get paid when it comes time for her to be sent off to marry somebody. And that's exactly what happens. When Winnie is to be married, and she doesn't get a choice in husband. Let me be clear. She does not get a choice in husband. Her wedding preparations are as magnificent as you could imagine a traditional Chinese wedding to be. All these gifts are purchased. Her dowry is huge. She reminisces about picking out beautiful silver chopsticks with a little chain between them, so like a married couple they will never part, and fans, and her dresses for the ceremony. Just, she's treated like a princess, but she doesn't understand the undercurrent of what's really happening, just like when she was a little girl. Winnie's mother never wanted to be in an arranged marriage. She didn't want to be a double second. That wasn't her goal. She was actually the daughter of decently progressive people. Her father was like a philosopher, a scholar. She was progressive. She was educated. But even with all of that, she couldn't escape thousands of years of tradition and was forced to marry a man. Now, there's a story about why she was forced to marry him. You're going to have to read the book to find out why she had to marry him. And the sad thing is, Winnie doesn't find this out about her mother until later in life. Too bad her mother didn't put that strength in her while she was still around. But Winnie's enjoying her wedding preparations. She thinks that finally her family has acknowledged her. They've invited her back to the main house. They're feeding her well. They're taking her and showing her off. She's going shopping. All of these packages are being delivered. It's a beautiful thing. And then she meets her husband to be, Win Fu. His name just sounds awful. It's like watching a superhero movie and stuff. When like you hear the name of the bad guy, you're like, nobody knew he was evil. We didn't know. We didn't know that evil McEvilton was going to be the bad guy. But anyway, I digress. So she meets her husband, Win Fu, and when the marriage happens, everything changes, like instantly. All of those beautiful things that were bought for her were immediately taken away and sold. The people that raised her after her mother disappeared, they were paid handsomely for their sacrifice. And Winnie finds out that all she is to the family that she marries into is a pair of hands to work and a pair of hips to breed sons. They did so much for her because she was so not valued. I don't even have words for it. She was so low down on the totem pole of value that any family that would take her filial home felt we have to give all of these things to make it worth their time to take her. Even the dowry that Winnie had, except for a few pieces she was able to hide, pieces of jewelry, even her dowry was taken from her. If you don't know what a dowry is, different cultures have different traditions, but in this tradition, a dowry is kind of like a woman's fallback money or stuff, jewelry, fine linens, money, of course, gold, silver. If something happens and she's no longer with her husband's family, like say fire happens, house burns down, everybody's in there but her, how's she going to live without the man? So it's kind of like a what if fund. It's not the husband's money. It's not the husband's family's. It's supposed to be the bride's, only the bride's. And he takes that too. There's actually, in older traditions in countries like this, girls work on their dowries. They to demonstrate their skills of house learning. We learned that in Snowflower and the Secret Fan by Lisa C. Sitting and doing needlework, doing embroidery, making shoes for their bound feet for the first son they would have. All of that belongs to that wife. Now, there are other cultures where the dowry is a fee that is paid to the family taking the girl. Like, here, please take this daughter off our hands, and by the way, here's a goat. But it's different in lots of different cultures. But we're just talking about this one. They take everything from her except for what she's able to hide. And she enters into a life of being beyond mistreated. And that comes to why this is called the kitchen god's wife. So we opened with the fable of the kitchen god, which is in the book, by the way, chapter 2 at the end. But the kitchen god was a man, of course, and he mistreated his wife. He had a good wife, and he treated her terribly to the point that he replaced her. And he died a very sad end. And what really strikes me about the tale of the kitchen god is the good wife who was cast out and somehow made her way in life. She still had love for this terrible man. And because of her loving tears of forgiveness as he's burning away in her oven, and when he gets to heaven and confesses to the gods that he knows what he's done and how awful it was, they make him the kitchen god, the decider of luck, basically, who watches all year round, and then before New Year reports back to the gods who needs better luck and who needs less luck. So even with all the evil things he did, he got the position of, messenger to the gods. I don't like that part. But where it becomes interesting is thinking about Winnie and her mother. They are both women who are put into positions they didn't choose, and they both did their best to fulfill the role society gave for them. But they were both able to find escape. Winnie's mother through, and Winnie through coming to America. Now, the reason that Helen has to tell Winnie, hey, Wen Fu's dead, you can stop hiding, is Winnie's name ain't Winnie. She changed her name. And so did Helen. Her name was Hulan before they came to America. By the way, side note, please don't change your name. Now, this book is a special case. I'm just saying you to me. The name that has come from your parents, from your culture, it's beautiful. If the world can learn to say Einstein, they can learn to say your name. Okay, where were we? Because of that, Winnie showed up in America still married to Wen Fu. Yeah, I just skipped from this part of the book to this part of the book because you need to read all this in the middle yourself to hear about all the things that happened during the World War. So Winnie has to make her way as a poor woman, a mistreated woman of a terrible man, through the ravages of World War II and communist China getting started. She has to get away from all of that while married to a terrible man who treats her terribly and ain't shy about it, and getting her pregnant every 5 minutes and still treating her terribly. She has all of that, and she escapes to America still married to this man. He is determined to find her. So when they cross to the States, they change their names so that they can't be found. And for 50 years of her life, she lives in fear of a man who's on the other side of the planet. What an effect for someone to have on a life. That's why you have to lead with generosity and kindness. You don't know what someone's been through. There is so much more I could say about this novel. It is beautiful. And you know what? I've got a few days off because it is the Labor Day weekend. I'm going to sit down and read some more books that I've been meaning to get to. So it's nice to have a chance to just not have to do anything, not read for work, not read for school, and just, yeah, I'm in college because education. But just to sit back and refresh myself on some amazing works that are out there. So I really encourage you, read this one, read it with an open mind and an open heart, and read it to understand the experiences of others. Good fiction is always grounded in reality. That's why books like this, even though it's a fictional story, it feels real because the world it's in is real. These are things that happen to somebody. Maybe not these somebodies, but they did happen. So I love Joy Luck Club. We'll talk about it eventually. But The Kitchen God's Wife, this is the one. And funny enough, you see how tattered and tore up it is? This is actually my copy from the 6th grade. It is very precious to me. So, to end the thing, as always, the contest is still going. You know what it is. I'm not going to repeat it right now. But thank you for everyone who has subscribed, and to those who watch the videos, subscribed or not, I really appreciate it. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, and down in the comments, tell me about what you love about this book and suggest others. I've gotten some great suggestions on anime and other books to review. Can't read them all at once, but hey, there's no time limit, right? We have all the time we need to talk about all the things we want to talk about. I'll catch y'all in the next one.